My name is Jim Riley, and I was co-creator, writer, and director on Night Trap. This is mid-'80s. Nintendo is doing very well with their video games, right? Mario Brothers type stuff. Sega is doing pretty well. I was working with Nolan Bushnell on a series of interactive advertising and interactive retailing campaigns. And I got a call from a guy who was actually my neighbor, Rob Fulop, who had developed Demon Attack and a number of Atari games. And he knew of a guy named Tom Zito working at another Nolan Bushnell company that had actually been presented. There was a guy, an engineer, who came in with this wafer that allowed you to attach it to a VCR and be able to interact with the video cartridge as your video source, but you could interact up to 4 choices at any one time. And they were trying to figure out what to do with it. So Rob knew that I had a background in live action interactive and introduced me to Tom. Tom wanted to put together some demos to take to Hasbro. And they said, so this is a relatively inexpensive addition to a VCR, and if we provide this enhancement, we can actually get into the video game business and allow us to compete. That's significant revenue, and now we're in the living room. We all came up with ideas, and my focus was more about these environments where you could go anywhere at any time or feel as if you could move more freely. One of the easiest ways to think of that is surveillance cameras. The first demo we did was Scene of the Crime to kind of play test the idea of being able to move around through surveillance cameras and see how interesting that was. So in Scene of the Crime, the basic idea is that this wealthy man has a safe full of money in his library, and he has this new surveillance system where you, the participant, is the security guy. And he tells you to please watch the safe, and if anybody tries to break in, he wants to know about it.
Watch them with the cameras. If anyone tries anything, I want to know about it.
Then you can move around the house, switching cameras, to try to follow what's going on. Of course, everybody has a plot to steal the money. So you're trying to figure out who's involved, how it happens, and then after a 3 to 5 minute quick period, sure enough, somebody stole the money. The lights were out. It was hard to tell exactly who it was. You couldn't just sit in the room to figure it out. And then he says, okay, who did it? And then you guess. So really simple concept, but 4 of us flew back to Hasbro, pitched it to Stephen Hasenfeld and a boardroom of 22 executives. That day we got funding, significant funding, to start what became Digital Pictures. Then they said, okay, we want to do a title that uses this. And at that point, I was working on a number of other things, but I felt like surveillance cameras is great, but to have more effect on what happens, rather than just an observer looking at what's going on, if we could create some device that allowed participants to feel more engaged and be able to subtly change the story. Again, not branching or changing the ending, but in fact, be able to do something and watch how the story changes. And have to play it multiple times to really understand the subtleties of that. And that was the traps, which could be done even within this very limited environment. What happened, though, was, everybody started to realize, wow, this is tricky stuff. Part of it is that there was never a real formula Hasbro decided that it didn't want to move forward. They began, I think, to understand that this is a significant investment. This is like starting a studio. We all went away in 1989, and then in 1992, Tom negotiated a deal with Sega, who had come up with the Sega CD, which was just powerful enough to stream. Back then, it's Donkey Kong, it's Mario Brothers, really simple pixelated graphics. And so all of a sudden, there was this option to play or experience a live-action interactive world that was all photoreal with real people, et cetera. So that I think was the initial excitement. And so when the Sega CD came out, everybody was just hats and horns, and this is fantastic, and look, we can interact with this. And we had a number of really interesting people that were experimenting, is really the best way to say it, with this sort of new platform. Not quite sure what it was. And everything from writers who were having constructive arguments about interactive narrative, which is very tricky, right? A lot of people will say, we don't want people to look the wrong way or we want to control their experience and to give this to novice or non-filmmakers, it goes against everything that they've been trained to do. The other side of that is the game, is a video game. And a video game, a really good video game, is you have full control. You're actually, the world is very believable, full of fascinating characters, and you're motivated to do a number of things to achieve whatever the goal is. But it's a high level of interactivity, right? And that's more important than the believability of your environment, right? So those are the two extremes. Even back then, those were the two extremes. But there was this funny gray area, and nobody quite knew what to make of it. We called it FMV or live action interactive or whatever those things were. We'd bring in a writer, a director, a game designer, a software programmer. There were all these different people sitting around a table speaking completely different languages, having very different sensibilities, trying to find some common ground. The first concept was to take the sort of wealthy guy and, with a safe full of money to the extreme. So it was a billionaire who had, Fort Knox in his house, modern house in Lake Tahoe. He was able to do this with comfort and leave knowing that he had this next generation security system, which included the latest surveillance cameras and also these traps and gadgets that would allow the 24/7 security team to be able to trap any potential intruders. And so happens one weekend his daughter shows up for a slumber party with all of her teenage friends, and the house is attacked by ninja burglars. And the reason I thought ninjas would be the cool approach would be that they move in the shadows. You start off with this really simple, clean concept that, could be refined and really have an edge to it and a look and stuff, and you end up with this thing that is a combination of bad notes over time. And somehow it went from ninjas focused on getting the money, and the girls being able to, they were sort of not the key, but they were very much caught in the mix, to vampires. There was this thing called reproducible violence. It's the first time I had heard that term, but it turns out to be a very real thing. And Hasbro in particular was very concerned about that. So we went into kind of the supernatural realm with the vampire. And they said, no, we don't want to see, vampires biting the girls. So these were toothless vampires, and they could not move too quickly. So they actually had to be kind of sick. So they had to be toothless, sick vampires. I mean, it just kept getting worse. And the aug term came because they really needed blood, and the only way they could get it was to auger in with a device like the trocar. That cleared as a non-reproducible violence. I thought that in our effort to homogenize this thing and make it more friendly and less scary, it actually was pretty creepy in terms of these, strange characters walking around with the trocar. In this case, the script writing was so bizarre because you had to do two things. You had to create a world, then you had to navigate within that world. You had technical limits of what you could actually do, but you were cheating that to make it look like you could do anything. So that was a whole thing. And then for the moments, you could write a scene, but the scene had to motivate somebody to go somewhere else. But the script was not 120 pages. The script was like this, right, with a timeline there. And people were going, how do I read this? I mean, it's kind of like, I'm here and what. Because everything was, by the way, time, right? Because you only had that much time for the scene. So blocking was very different. Rather than sitting down with the actors and saying, what's the intent here, and should you walk over here, and where should you? It was like, okay, we got. You have 24 seconds. So how do we block this where you're going to end up going out that door, but it's got to look natural, right? Yeah. And you got to be out that door in 18 seconds, because in 18 seconds you're going to appear in the hallway. I walked around with a timeline. I think it became sort of a joke, which is, where are we now? And I'd have to take the timeline out, and it had 8 tracks, right? 4 at any one time with stills. And I would be able to figure out. So it was tricky. That we shot days and nights, sets and locations. I was surprised at how quickly everybody got into it. Right? It wasn't difficult for them to go, oh, I get it. Okay, so I'm going to be here, but I could be over there, and then depending on what happens with the aug here, I might. And they got into it, and in some cases they adjusted their performance accordingly, which was a wonderful surprise. We didn't have a lot of money to cast name talent and that sort of thing. Dana Plato was someone who we were lucky to get.
Well, there's something about Kelly.
Woman's intuition again, huh?
Oh, Victor, you monster. Come on, let's go. We don't want to upset the augers.
All the augs were stunt guys with trash bags taped to them. But when the trap went, they had to be in a position where they were balanced, right? Because when they drop through the floor, they've got to be able to do it. How do you move? You do this. So that became the aug walk. We had to figure out in the shooting how to be most economical. So we generally shot out each environment. The bedroom was one of the first sets we shot, and the lobby or the foyer was one of the last. But most of the continuity, there were so many other issues that continuity like that was the least of anybody's concern.
This guy is really wigged out.
Trying to create an environment where the cast, and to some degree the DP and the lighting guys, really could participate as if they were making a movie. There were other technical restrictions. They were very nervous about things that were too dark. I mean, the way it was originally envisioned was that it was really cool and edgy. And it turned out to be super bright because they were concerned that if it got too dark, that it would pixelate too much. Because the technology was so new and we were right at the edge. What was interesting is we shot Night Trap on 35 millimeter. In fact, Don Burgess was the DP and went on to do Forrest Gump, and not that Night Trap launched his career. I mean, Don Burgess, this brilliant DP, is having to essentially light the room like everything's got neon lights. And we were all unhappy about that. But at the same time, it's the first time it's being done, right? And there were a lot of people involved, and everybody was making their best guess. The shoot was tricky. We shot days and nights, sets and locations. The post was very tricky. I ended up using, I think it was Ediflex at one pass. It was the only way to cut this, because what you end up with, it's a puzzle, right? So think of it as, a 3D chess game where you're trying to figure out, okay, I got a little piece right there, and I got a piece that ties into that. In spite of all of this, it was a title that became very popular with a lot of people, I think primarily because it was one of the first to have real characters, in a real photoreal world.
Sarah, we're in this huge house with all your friends. We have telephones, we have a car, your parents are gone, and you say so?
Come on, Sarah, what's the first thing you think of?
Party!
We had gone through a 3-year period with Hasbro where we looked at the marketplace, we did a ton of play testing, and I don't think it was ever clearly resolved what this thing was. And in fact, when it was ported over to Sega CD, I felt more concerned. Yes, it was being released, but it was being released on a game platform. And sure enough, everybody was going, well, this isn't really a game. I mean, this is an interesting thing, and it's fun. And for a lot of people, they didn't need a heavy interaction. So the live action, real characters was more interesting, at least for a period of time. Night Trap goes out, and still a new market. Nobody quite knows what's going on, and I don't think the sales were that great. And then all of a sudden, there's a Senate hearing on violence in video games. And Night Trap is one of the premier, and I'm just thinking, you're kidding. I mean, because by that time, we had homogenized it down to the simplest things. The only thing that was probably the most violent was the trocar in the bathroom scene.
Megan, this isn't gonna work. You're not scaring me. Wait, what are you doing now?
If you saw the Senate hearing, what it looked like is somebody had just edited out the most violent things from different games, including Night Trap, and put it together and showed it to these guys who, of course, most likely never played video games, so they didn't really understand the market. But what they thought is, my 8-year-old kid is being trained to kill people. If you talk to the kid, he'd go, what are you talking about? This is like not a big deal. So I think what happened is there were selects that were made, including the trocar scene in the bathroom of Night Trap. They said, not only is this violence, not only are you promoting violence to our kids and somehow subconsciously turning them into, violent criminals, but because it's real, it's actually more scary. Up till that time, it was pixelated graphics. And when it became real, I think everybody thought, oh my God, now this is really bad. I don't think there was a lot of understanding of what was going on in the business. I don't think that Night Trap, in comparison to some of the other games that were out at that time, was that violent. It did have its moments, and when you, just like anything, once you take those things and you put them together, you can make anything look like the worst horror film you've ever seen. But thank God, because two things happened. One is sales of Night Trap just went through the roof, and then they came up with the rating system. The irony is that Night Trap is still on the list of most violent games. And you look at what's out there, I mean, there's no comparison. The shower scene, it's not even a shower scene, but the bathroom scene with the trocar, it looks pretty gruesome when you do the close-up and you see the drill going into the neck, and I get that. At least back then it was, considered to be pretty gruesome. But, for some people, you have to look at the odds as kind of sad. What's happening now is it's worth bringing back Night Trap and some other things just because there are a lot of people that would love to see it in better resolution, and I don't know where the film is. I mean, fortunately, I made a copy of the original timed masters, and those were, again, timed for this unknown world. So everything's bright, but even then, you're going to see a lot more contrast and a lot more detail than you did through the Sega CD. I'm hoping that the fans of the game will actually have a newer, fresher experience with the resolution change. I'm also very interested in people that have never been in this world before and don't think of it as a game and don't think of it as a movie, but think of it as live-action interactives. Today, you say interactive, and it's like, yeah, so what? You know, what specifically do you mean? Your computer's interactive, right? So back then, it was people didn't understand when you said interactive. They really didn't know what that meant. Or they'd have very different ideas about what that meant. So in some ways, that part of it, I think is going to be fun.